Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm extremely excited for this conversation today because it's one that we never talk about. So, there's this thing that happens when we all get job offers or trying to work on offers. And sometimes we do a good job negotiating, and sometimes we don't. And one of the things that really recently came to my attention is there are people out there who help with this negotiation, consultants, and they help you figure this stuff out. And so I invited somebody here to help talk about this conversation with respect to enablement careers and how we're navigating all the changes that we make. So Sara Perelli-Minetti is here, and she is an expert in this specific field. And maybe Sarah, introduce yourself a little bit for everybody who's joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, by the way. It's wonderful to be part of your community. So, as Dave said, I'm Sarah and I'm a compensation consultant and a negotiation coach. So what that means is I help people negotiate stronger job offers, internal raises, and severance packages.
Interesting. See, a lot of us didn't know that existed. So it's good to know that it does exist. But so I want to keep it very real for everybody listening. So I talk to folks all the time who are in negotiations for an offer, or maybe even have a couple offers that they're trying to figure out and do multiple negotiations at the same time. So I want to go deep on this. And so I know from our prior conversation, you have a very big point of view on when does comp negotiation actually begin?
Mm, yeah. So your compensation negotiation begins on the very first recruiter screen. That's something that sometimes catches people by surprise when I say it, but it's true because on that call, you're usually asked by the recruiter what your compensation expectations are.
Mhm.
And how you answer that question, first of all, can determine whether or not you move forward in the process.
Yep.
If you anchor too high, you can actually price yourself out of a job. And if you anchor too low, it can actually make negotiating to a number that you feel good about much, much more difficult down the line.
So what do you recommend in that situation? Like, how do you broach that? How do you handle that?
Yeah. So there are three things that I think are really important for everyone to do before that recruiter screen, or sort of two things before the recruiter screen, and then one thing when you're actually on it. So before you ever get on that first call with the recruiter, first and foremost, do your homework on what is reasonable expected compensation for that job. So you can do that through a little bit of external benchmarking. So using publicly available sources or asking friends who work in HR for access to PAVE, Carta, levels, some of the like overall public salary information. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be a somewhat biased sample. It also can help to upload the job description to an LLM. Again, the information is not perfect, but generally the target estimated ranges are fairly accurate. So that's one thing you should do. Just like go out there, take the job description, see what information you can find. The second thing I always have people do is use your network. And this
Yep.
is where actually someone like you is such an amazing resource. Best case scenario is you know someone who works at that company and you can ask them what a reasonable salary band or total target total comp would be for that level
Yep.
in that job function. That's best case scenario. But if you don't know someone at that exact company, asking around within your existing network for people who are at a similar level in similar industries or, valuations, what their target total comp looks like, or not even what theirs is, what is reasonable to
Yeah.
expect,
Yeah.
that can be helpful. So that gives you two data points coming into the conversation on what there might be. The other thing to do before the conversation is to actually have a good sense of your own numbers.
Mhm.
If you're currently employed, everyone should know what their stay number is. So the stay number is literally the number at which it it does not make sense financially for you to leave your current job.
Right.
And it's not only like what are you making, it's also the value of your equity, both vested, unvested, any sort of long-term compensation. future PTO, that kind of thing. Know what that number is. And then also know, like if you're job searching, know what your sort of minimum viable number is and then your ideal number. So that's the homework you do before your call.
Yeah.
And like that should give you a range that's probably within like 100 to 150K. On the call, when the recruiter asks you, Dave, what are your compensation expectations? Most people either throw out a random number or they share what they're making today if
Mhm.
they're currently employed. Don't do either one of those things. Instead, say to the recruiter, I'm happy to share my expectations. However, I'm actually really interested in what the target total compensation is for the role. What's been budgeted?
Mhm.
And then you just pause. Most of the time, the recruiter will tell you. And the reason I say target total compensation, a lot of times people fixate on base salary alone. It's often the largest percentage of our
Mhm.
compensation. But especially for folks in your world where we're talking about OTE, we're talking about huge variable compensation components, we're talking about equity, you want to understand what they are targeting for that full picture
Mhm.
so that we can start to get a sense to that. And then we are anchored to what are they targeting as opposed to unintentionally anchoring too low for your number. Now, if the recruiter straight up won't tell you, which sometimes happens, we respond by saying, I'm exploring opportunities, note plural, I'm exploring opportunities in the range of 300 to 400K target total comp. And that number, by the way, should be a number that you can actually live with and informed by some of the homework you did ahead of time.
Yep. All right. I'm going to ask you a kind of a curveball question about this because you were mentioning before about your stay number, the
Yeah.
number at which like I'm not going to budge. How do you factor in job satisfaction? Like I'm happy, I'm not happy. That's an intangible. And it's hard to put a value on that. How do you just, I know it's hard to I'm putting you on the spot here, but like, how do you factor in things like those intangibles?
Oh, it's actually a huge part of it. And when I kick off work with a client, before we ever talk about numbers, before I even look at their offers, I want to hear what their priorities are.
Mm.
And when I say priorities, like I'm not, yes, the financial side is part of it, but like role content. What is the kind of life, like the phrase work-life balance? Like, what is the lifestyle that you're actually looking for? How does this role fit in your overall career? So, job satisfaction, like your personal motivation for the content of the role, what you feel like your advancement opportunities look like at that company, who you're working with, absolutely informs whether or not you stay or whether you go. And so the stay number, it's good to know what it is, but absolutely you should be factoring in like, am I happy here? And am I fulfilled by this work? And also, what phase of my life am I in? Am I in a phase where like I just need the steady income? We are not optimizing for growth. We are not necessarily optimizing for trajectory. I just need the steady paycheck. Or are we at a phase where you can take a little bit more risk, potentially leave behind some money
Yep.
for an opportunity that is much more fulfilling and is going to give you new skills and experience that you couldn't have at your current employer?
Yeah, and that sounds right to me. And I think the pitfall I see a lot of people do as I talk to them about roles they're considering is they'll say, that number, well, it depends on the job or it depends. There's a big it depends. And so that's their catch-all. And so I see them go into conversations they may or may not be okay with, right? There's like maybe at their level, but they'll say, oh, I'll have this conversation. It depends with the expectation of I'll negotiate them up or we'll just see.
Oof. So for the negotiating people up, I actually have a threshold. So if your expectations are more than 30% higher than what
Yep.
is what you're initially anchored to on that first recruiter call, seriously consider whether or not it's a process you want to continue. I do sometimes have clients improve their outcomes between 30 and 40%, but more than that is very unlikely.
Yep.
And if you're starting to hit like that number, counting on being able to negotiate up isn't necessarily wise.
Yeah. 'Cause I've seen people start it, then they realize, well, I'm not okay with that number. And so they said they were at the beginning because it depends. And then as they got through it, they're not as okay with it because they couldn't get them high enough.
Yeah, and the other thing is like it's not always clear from the beginning because so much of the interview process is assessing fit both ways.
Yes.
Uh, and you know this, like sometimes we're willing to have slightly lower comp than what we're making previously if we are super excited about the mission,
Yes.
about the hiring manager, about the growth opportunities. But that doesn't necessarily reveal itself until you're a few interviews
Yes.
in.
Right. And therein lies the tricky part where people might start down a path that they don't want to be on, or even sometimes conversely, they don't go down a path that maybe they should because they have a perception of the company or of the leadership or the team, and they just don't start conversations. When in fact, to your point, once you're three conversations in, you're like, holy cow, this is pretty interesting.
Well, and I think this actually gets to something that you and I talked about the first time we ever met, which is the mindset we bring to this process. So, the most powerful mindset that anyone can bring to a negotiation is one of curiosity.
Mm,
And I would imagine that that's a huge part of what makes someone really successful in an interview process
yes.
as well.
Yes. I think that's exactly right. We'll probably end up touching more on that in a little bit. So I want to bring this back to the enablement world where
Yeah.
for most of the folks, it's a series of one-on-one conversations, interviews, and then typically at the end, there's a panel presentation of some sort. Um, as you think about the stages of conversations of the interviews, and you think
Mm.
about negotiating throughout, how do you negotiate from interview one, two, three, four, or five? Like, how does that change, if at all?
I like to think of it as building momentum throughout the
Mm,
process. So there are typically three major people who are the decision makers on your compensation. There's the hiring manager,
yep.
there's the skip level, or whoever the like VP plus approver is, depending on how the organization is structured. And then there's someone from HR, usually from the compensation team, if it's a larger company. And so throughout the interview process, there are two of those people who you can influence. You can influence the hiring manager at the skip level. And really, what we're going for is we want the hiring manager pounding the table and saying, Dave is my guy. Like, I want to do what it takes. I want to come in like as high up in the band as we absolutely can because I am convinced that he is the person who is going to hit the ground running from day one, add the most value, be the best asset on this team. And then you want the skip level to have been sufficiently impressed
Yeah.
where they don't feel like they're expending too much personal equity to approve that higher comp. And they're like, yeah, no, I saw it too. So you want those two business leaders being in tandem and saying, like, this person is exceptional and deserves an exceptional compensation package. That is then used to influence the decision maker in compensation, whose role more than anything is just making sure that whatever package you're offered fits within the company's established comp
It's equitable.
philosophy,
It's fair.
frameworks. It's equitable. That's right. Interestingly, the recruiter, and this depends very much so on the level of the job, but like
Mm,
I'm talking about a corporate recruiter, someone who's an employee,
yeah.
um, they can also be a huge advocate for you. And you can speak to this in your world as well. Um, they may not be the decision maker, but my goodness, if you have shown up respectful, curious, warm, thoughtful throughout the
Yep.
process, they can also play a huge role in positioning your asks to the hiring manager to the skip level.
Yeah, it was funny. As you were describing the two you can influence, I was agreeing, but also saying that third person, the third leg of that stool, because I've seen, and you made the right point at the end of there, is I've seen that person, especially if they have a very close relationship with the hiring manager, like they're go-to-market recruiter, and they were
Mhm.
in tandem. They're very, very close in what they do. I've seen them be very effective in helping make the case and go to bat for you and help position. So I feel like, it's more of a subtle EQ kind of thing you do with them of really getting them to feel like you're the person, and then giving the hiring manager the conviction to pound the table.
That's right. Yeah, and it's an important point because the recruiter, more than the hiring manager, has a sense of how many people it took to
Right.
get through the funnel to get to this moment of actually wanting to make an offer. And they can remind the hiring manager of that fact.
Right. I have no other pipeline. It's this or nothing. So we got to get this guy through if that's what it takes.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So, okay. So building momentum. And I think in your point is, at each stage, you want to keep reminding them of your value, and that therein lies the momentum.
I would say I'd frame it a little bit differently. I think it's more about like, are you throughout the process asking the right questions to understand their pain points, their imperatives, what they're hoping for from this role? And you're telling a really effective story of how, based on your skills and past experiences, you're the person who can help them meet those goals.
Yeah.
But it's constantly connecting the dots between what they are saying is important and what you've done before, and starting to, in the interview process, paint a picture of that future together.
Yeah. And I think you said this earlier, and I'll double down on this. The notion of curiosity, it is the skill that everyone needs to polish up and really have top of mind at all stages of the interview process, before, during, after. Like, it needs to be so much of how you do what you do, and if you do it right, that becomes your superpower.
100%. One of my favorite recruiters who I ever worked with when I was interviewing for an executive level position at a Fortune 500 company flat out told me the questions that she can tell on the first screen from the questions that a candidate asks how far they're going to make it in the process.
Yeah, even my own example is like when I'm going after new clients and having conversations, I know the questions I ask are different than that of their internal recruiters might ask, or a generic recruiter might ask. And so it's just one of those things. It's how I show up, and I can see their faces change through the questions I ask, more so than the answers I give to their questions of me.
Yeah. And it's interesting because with compensation, and I find that a lot of candidates are very comfortable asking questions about the job, but they start to feel nervous when it comes to asking questions about the compensation because they're afraid of how it's going to come across.
Yeah, yeah,
And so when I am working with someone, a lot of the coaching that I actually do is one, like reminding them, asking questions about how a company's compensation works. That's not entitlement. That's actually being very thoughtful and showing that you're a deliberate decision maker about something really important.
yeah. And that's a pretty good segue, because the thing, so in the world of enablement, most folks negotiate their on target earnings, right? Their base plus their bonus.
Mhm.
And so I think people are kind of used to talking about that. But some
Mhm.
people will get RSUs or options depending on the stage of the company. But you touched on this earlier about, like, what else do you view as the levers, the things you can pull on besides just OTE?
Yeah. So even with an OTE, like there's the OTE amount, but also the ratio. A
Mm,
lot of times I help my clients negotiate that. I have quite a few examples of where the initial offer was the ratio was 70-30 base to variable
yeah.
compensation. And based on the client's priority, like are they trying to optimize for more guaranteed cash? Or like, do they want to make more room for upside? They've actually adjusted that ratio. So
Mm.
sometimes we negotiate that. And with the bonus, with the variable compensation portion, sometimes we also negotiate guarantees for year one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, especially like if someone's coming into an existing book of business that is, you know, based on whatever payout history there might be, is there going to be a really steep onboarding curve, something like that? Can we guarantee a baseline payout for the first couple quarters. I actually just negotiated for someone in the customer success function for that. The second thing that we can negotiate, even just on OTE, is a guaranteed year one compensation review.
Mm,
This is especially important for folks who are joining companies that are Series C or earlier and might not have as defined formal comp
mm,
review processes. You want to make sure that that milestone is on the calendar. But then when we start thinking about equity, really, yes, we have to negotiate equity amount, but we also want to negotiate equity terms. So for RSUs and options, the first thing we want to make sure we understand is the vesting schedule. Most RSU grants, option grants are 4-year grants with a 1-year cliff.
mhm.
I always have my clients ask to waive the 1-year cliff. So you can start vesting immediately.
And
And
that's a negotiable thing.
oh, yeah, it absolutely is. And I find a lot of employers are willing to move on it. The other thing, and when you start vesting immediately, if it's options, like an employee liquidity event happens in your first year, you can participate.
Right.
If it's RSUs and there's a liquidity event, you can start, having
Yeah.
that income right away. It's really important. The other key equity term, and this is especially true for RSUs, is negotiating refresh grants.
Uh,
So most official grants are, like I said, 4 years. Well, if you're at a company longer than that, can we negotiate a guaranteed refresh to maintain your level of target total compensation?
yeah. Yeah.
And then for options, there are two things that are really important to negotiate, two terms that have to do with what happens when you leave the company. So, one is your post termination exercise window. This is essentially like how much time do I have after I'm no longer an employee to exercise options? Most companies offer between 30 to 90 days. And like if you've been terminated involuntarily, if you've been laid off, you don't have another job, like that is a very short period of time to decide if you want to spend thousands of
Yeah.
dollars to exercise. So I have all my clients negotiate at least 1 year post-termination exercise window. And recently I've been seeing earlier stage companies be more open to 10-year post-termination exercise windows.
Wow.
It changes the tax treatment. You go from ISOs to NSOs, but it is like any financial planner will tell you, it is worth having the extra time to make a much more informed decision. So
Yep.
that's one equity term. And then for my clients who are VP plus, the other equity term we always want to negotiate is double trigger acceleration.
Explain that, please.
Yes. So this is essentially an accelerated vesting of your equity in the event that one, the company is acquired. So that's the first trigger. And two, your role is eliminated as a part of that acquisition.
Mm,
Without this protection, uh, you can lose any unvested equity. But with this protection, your equity automatically vests. And then, hopefully you've already negotiated a large post-termination exercise window.
yeah. Yeah.
You have options on what you want to do with your remaining equity.
That is material. That could be massive.
Oh yeah, I mean that's where the real wealth creation happens, especially at more senior levels where like your base salary might be only 50% of your target total comp. Um, and then beyond that, I mean, this is just the cash components. Like we are negotiating sign-on bonuses, which usually are offered when we need to make someone whole
Hmm.
for unvested equity or, another performance bonus they're leaving behind. That's usually the most standard case. Or if we just can't quite get to the right number on OTE, especially in year one with prorated bonuses, we can negotiate a sign-on to close that gap. We can negotiate title. Sometimes this is very important to people. And then my personal favorite, or we can negotiate start date. We
Hmm.
have a story that we're going to talk through later about how much value that can bring. And then we also want to think about negotiating downside protections.
Explain.
So, especially for people who are VP plus, the two things that become really important as you're more senior are your non-compete
Mm,
and your severance package. Usually at that executive level, you are signing a standard employee agreement that comes with a non-compete that already exists. It's usually 12 months. Um, Not enforceable in California, but I know you have clients all over the country.
Sure.
And then a usually a standardized exit package for executives. The terms and length of time may or may not align on those two things. I have many clients where they are asked to sign a 12-month non-compete and the standard severance at their level is like 3 months.
Mhm.
The math doesn't math. You could end up kept out of your field. So we always ask to understand what those are. And if there's a big mismatch where the numbers are really low, we either negotiate to improve them or we ask for more cash in other places to account for that.
Couple couple thoughts. One is going back to the base and bonus, that part from before. In the enablement world, sometimes the bonus is tied to the CRO's number.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's tied to MBOs. Sometimes it's a combination thereof. And I also think there is an opportunity to negotiate what your bonus is based on. Because for some
Mm.
folks, it's out of their control, the CRO's number, and that could be a good thing. But a lot of folks want control. And so I think there's an opportunity in there to have a little more control over your fate. And so I think that's probably one little more subtle negotiation lever of just getting clarity on how you're being bonused. So in addition to the number, but also what it's based on.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of the process where even before we try to negotiate, you want to understand what goes into your bonus calculation.
Yep.
What factor, yeah, how much of it is company performance, team performance, individual performance, and then for each of those, what is the process that goes into it? And I always have people ask about for company and team performance, what's the payout history?
Yeah. That was my next point. Yeah, exactly right. If
Right?
nobody gets it, it's immaterial.
Right. And that helps you change your personal compensation expectations. And if like they are significantly paying below the target, like if they never hit 100%, well, that becomes justification for a better base
Yeah.
or for a better sign-on to try to hit that target total comp number that they're anchoring to.
And on the latter point, when you're talking about, for VPs, whether it's the double trigger or the downside protection, a few things you mentioned, how much of that is translatable to the director, senior director level? Is that really
Yeah.
not really appropriate, or is it still applicable?
It's incredibly applicable. So double trigger acceleration, you probably can't get. We'll
Okay.
put that one aside.
Yeah.
For the downside protection on severance and non-compete, it might not be negotiable, but you need to ask about it so that you have a sense of what happens if things don't work out. So I always have my directors and senior directors ask, what is, and you sort of frame it as like, I know it feels awkward to ask about, you
Yeah.
know, leaving before I've even started, but what does an exit package look like at my level? And most companies will tell you. And if the number comes back and you're like, wow, 6 weeks of severance, that's terrible. Like, that's terrible. You do two things. One, like you you apply that to your own personal financial planning on like, okay, like knowing that this is what would be on the table, like how much runway do I need to create in my own savings to make sure I'd be okay? Because we're looking at job searches at the director level that might take 6 months. I don't know what you're seeing
It can,
among
yeah,
your
six
clients.
plus or minus, but that's a good mean. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, um, sometimes that is, or that can be used as justification for asking for more cash in other places.
Yeah. It's
So,
it's a risk calculation, right? It's like you have to mitigate the risk somehow.
and people feel uncomfortable asking, but I always nudge my clients to do it, and they're always so happy that they know, even if it's not a term that is directly negotiable.
And that brings up my next set of questions. So, there's a stereotype of how negotiations go, and there's
Mm.
screaming involved, there's desk pounding, and everyone's making enemies, and it's kind of everyone's equally miserable at the end of it. You think of it differently.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. Um, so there's actually a ton of research, academic research on the tone, mindset, and approach that actually does lead to better outcomes, especially for women.
Yep.
And that is one that is warm, collaborative, and frankly, where you lead with curiosity, not with entitlement or making demands.
Okay.
You are negotiating with your future colleagues. Everyone needs to feel great about working together. And so it is totally possible to stand firm in your self-worth and your value while, and holding firm on some of those numbers while also doing it in a way where you just come across as a very thoughtful person.
Can you just give me some sound bites or just of how that sounds?
Mm. Yeah. For an example, so the recruiter gives you your first initial offer, like walks you through the numbers. The first thing I coach people to say is, first of all, like, thank you so much. I appreciate, thank you. If you feel
Yes.
gratitude and excitement, express that. Then you say, I know every company's compensation philosophy is different. Can you just explain to me how you landed at this offer? And that is the moment for the company to be able to say, like, oh, like we placed you here for the following reasons. Another way is for base salary, for example. You always want to ask, so what is the salary band for this role? And where does this offer fall in that band? You're not commenting on what the salary is. You're not saying, like a bunch of people before I worked them, like they catch themselves saying when the recruiter gives them a number that's lower than they were hoping for, like they say things like, well, this is disappointing. I was hoping for more. Coach people, receive the information neutrally, make sure you're clear, and then ask for context.
Mm. Right, because if you want to negotiate, you're negotiating on the context. They perceive your value here, and you're here, and you're disputing their assumptions as opposed to their outcome. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
Yes. Well, and also like, so I think one of the most important parts of an effective negotiation that I think a lot of people don't realize is you have to negotiate within the bounds of the company's compensation philosophy. And in order to understand their comp philosophy, you have to ask a bunch of questions. And so that's stuff like, so what is the salary band for this role? What benchmark are you looking for to the market? Like, are you looking at 50th percentile? Do you try to pay 75th percentile? What is your aim here? How do you pay for performance? How do you equity grants? Asking, are these standardized by level?
Mm.
So, like, before we ever put a number out there for more base salary, I want to know the salary band. Before we ask for more equity, I want to understand, like, do they just have standard equity grants by level? And, like, that's that. And then we focus on negotiating
Yeah.
terms. That context totally changes how you approach things.
Yeah, and just like if it's a very flat organization, if you're fighting for a VP title and they don't have VPs there, you're wasting your capital. You have no reason. You're just going to hurt your case, not make your case.
Yeah, exactly. And, on base salary, especially, like I have two examples just from clients last week. One of them, when we asked about the salary band, we found out her initial offer came in at 104% of the base salary band because we had done such a good job, by the way, in that first recruiter screen of anchoring to the right expectations. So, with that information, I know we are not going to ask for more base salary. We're going to focus on other terms. I had another client where we asked about the base salary band. We found out she was being brought in below the midpoint, despite having twice as much experience as the job description called for, that was highly, highly relevant. With her, we were able to actually negotiate an additional 40K in base salary that still had her within the band, but we were able to say, like, based on my experience, I would hope to come in above the midpoint for the role instead of below it. But you need that context in order to have that framing.
Yeah, curiosity again, coming to the rescue.
Yes.
It, I love just this is your job. This is what you do. I'd love you to, I guess, share an example of how you work with people, an example of like how you've taken a person from here to here. You gave some snippets a second ago, but like I'd love to kind of hear that process for you.
Yeah. So my favorite time to work with someone, by the way, is before they have their offer, because I can coach them for that initial recruiter screen and make sure we have a really good anchor, or I can prep them for the offer call. But the first conversation that I have with people is about their priorities. So it's kind of like what you were saying at the very beginning, which is how do we factor in job satisfaction? Before we even talk about the numbers, let's talk about what is most important to you as you think about taking this job. There are, 10 to 15 things that we can negotiate, but like really, what are the three to four that are most important to you? And how does this factor into looking at this job holistically? So that's the first conversation I have with people. The second thing we do is a leverage assessment. How you negotiate, meaning what you ask for, how you frame that ask really does depend on your individual leverage.
Yeah.
The two biggest things about you that influence that are you currently employed and how many offers do you have? It really does matter. If you are currently unemployed and have one offer, it doesn't mean you have no leverage. You do. You got the job. But you're going to have a softer ask. So we do that leverage assessment. And then we start gathering context, everything you and I just described.
Hmm.
And that usually happens on the offer call, where we can ask the recruiter a lot of these questions about comp philosophy. And then we work together to craft the actual negotiation strategy. So, what are we asking for? Specifically, the numbers. Which terms are we negotiating? What is the right framing? We write their counteroffers. I feel very strongly about negotiating in writing as much as possible.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah, it allows us to lay things out holistically. And it allows the candidate to have their words. I think a lot of times emails get forwarded. I'm
Mm.
like, hey, like, Dave asked for an additional 100K. Here's his email. Like, but you want to make sure you have the chance to put things in writing. And then once, the dance begins on the numbers and getting to the terms, I work with my clients to prep them for any live conversations, review their employment agreement, and then, get to the point where they sign. So that's the process. What does that actually look like? So I'll give you an example. So someone came to me a few months ago who was a senior director of revenue enablement at I think a Series E company that was very close to IPO, looking at about 500K total comp at the time, once you include equity,
Hmm.
and was evaluating two opportunities, one at a Series A and one at a Series B company. And we ended up negotiating with the Series B company. And so when I started working with this client, the first thing I did was establish, okay, what are your priorities? For her, she was okay taking a pay cut,
Mm.
but she wanted to make sure that she still had at least 300K of cash. So she was at that 500K number. She wanted to make sure still 300K of cash. She had dependents, financial obligations. Let's make sure on that. Title was really important to her.
Mm.
She was looking for a VP title. And then she also wanted to make sure that the equity terms were
Mm.
really strong, given the stage of the company. You're joining a Series B. Um,
Yeah.
and then the fourth thing, this person was negotiating with someone she'd worked with before. And so she was like, I just want to make sure that I don't leave something on the table, but I have to preserve the relationship.
Hmm.
So we defined those priorities in our approach, and we ended up negotiating not just her OTE amount, but also the ratio. It was offered as 70/30. We negotiated it to 80/20 because guaranteed cash was more important to her.
Hmm.
We also negotiated a 12-month comp review
Hmm.
because the company didn't have established annual comp reviews.
Interesting.
We negotiated additional equity, not just like the equity grant, but we also negotiated a 1 year post-termination exercise window.
Mm.
And then the most powerful thing we negotiated, she was leaving quite a bit of unvested equity on the table. And we calculated the value of that along with some PTO at about $90,000. We asked for a sign-on bonus to make her whole. The Series B company wasn't able to offer that, but what they did come back with and say it was, we're comfortable delaying your start date so that you can have that
Ah,
extra equity vest.
I see.
And so that ended up like in total, we ended up negotiating over 125K in upside for her across
Wow.
all of those elements.
That's significant. I want to do a little bit of lightning around here just because we have only a little bit of amount of time left. One thing that comes up a lot, especially these days, is people are scared to negotiate because you know I need a job or there's people lined up around the block who want this job. You mentioned tonality and being curious. I think that goes into it. But again, what do you say to people who are scared to push back, to not be grateful and just take it and run?
Yeah, so I would say thing one is reminding yourself that you won the job. They want you. Like you are starting from a position of strength. So like stand firm and be confident in the fact that you were the person after a long process who has the experience that they're most excited about. Congratulations, like stand firm in that. The second thing is knowing that there are many different ways to negotiate, and you can negotiate in a way isn't like not just curious, but like is very open-ended. So when we have more leverage, we can be very specific with the numbers that we're targeting, like, an additional 50K in base salary, a sign-on bonus of 90K. When we are negotiating with less leverage, we can frame it as things like, would you be open to a sign-on to help close the gap in year one compensation from the prorated bonus? And the third thing is to know that um, it is very unlikely that a company will rescind an offer if all of these questions are done in a very polite, collaborative, open way.
Yeah,
The
I've seen offers rescinded, but usually when the person acts like a big jerk.
and let's not do that.
Yeah,
These are your future colleagues. If you just come across as very thoughtful and ask these questions, you might not get answers you like. You might not have as positive a negotiation outcome as you like, but the act of asking for more, if done in the respectful way, is always going to be well received.
yeah, it shows your value. And along these same lines, so I've been doing this for about 7.5 years at this point, and consistently over those years, I've noticed a gender pay gap.
Mm.
Specifically, as you when you look at the bonuses, women tend to get a lot less than men do. Bases aren't that dissimilar, actually, as it turns out. But in the bonuses where I see the biggest disparity,
Mm.
I guess any advice specifically for women beyond what you've already said so far? Because again, it's a
Yeah.
pervasive and pernicious thing. What would you tell to the women?
Just to clarify, is this like once people are established or employees, you're seeing differences in
Hmm.
bonus payouts or a difference in the ability to negotiate a bonus target?
It's all the above. It's all baked in. When I look at compensation overall, because
Yeah.
I have a lot of data. When
Yeah.
I look at it, whether it's their initial hiring package or what they've gotten 3 years in, where they are at that point, it's all kind of blended together. But
Mm.
there exists a gender pay gap on the bonus specifically.
So once you're inside the company, you're beholden to the internal processes. There is quite a bit of academic research that shows that a lot of times uh, men are paid on potential,
Hmm.
and there are certain qualities that men have that are often more observed in men. I'm not saying that men have these qualities more, but like things that might contribute to a higher incentive payout versus how women show up at work. So like this is not, and so much of that is systemic bias. So I don't want to put blame on women at all, but like for anyone who, when I'm coaching people on internal raises and promotions, the thing I always say is like, always have your talking points on the quantifiable impact that you've had. and make sure that like when you think about where your time is going, you are focused on where am I driving the bottom line? Where am I driving results? Not what have I done, but
Yeah.
what is the impact that
Yes.
I've had? So have that story. When it comes to actually negotiating, um, how men and women are received when negotiating is different. Again, there's a bunch of academic research on this. It is even more important for women to ask all of those clarifying questions and gather the context so that they are perceived as collaborative. That's the social expectation that women are warm and collaborative, so that they are perceived that way. Whereas the entitlement vibes
Hmm.
are sometimes more accepted
Yes.
from men.
Yeah, I think men are given a little bit of they can kind of force their way through it. Women need the ammo. They need to have the to learn more about it to be able to substantiate their value. It's not right, but that's what I think to your point, that's how it shakes out.
It's not fair. It's not right. However, we can't pretend this dynamic doesn't exist. So the other, like, what can I tell women? Like, talk to each other. That's
Hmm.
actually the most important thing is make sure you are sharing comp with each other, asking your male colleagues about it so that you have that inside information that tells you what is possible.
Yes, that's very good advice. All right, last question, lightning round. I like to do this on all our on my things. What are the three things you would recommend people to keep in mind when going into a negotiation? It's three things. What are they?
Three things. One, know your walkaway number.
Yep.
That's something that exists for everyone. Um, Make sure you've gathered all of the context on the company comp philosophy
Hmm.
that you can. And then the third, we've said this so many times, but it bears repeating, stay curious.
I love it. Those are three great things to keep in mind. Sara, thank you. I can tell you just for a fact, this will be a breath of fresh air for a lot of the folks in the enablement world who don't get coached on this that much. They have a good community, but they don't think about compensation in this way and dissecting it in this way. And so this has been an amazing conversation. I'm really grateful for you sharing your wisdom and your experience with everybody out there.
Thanks for having me.